I'm just waiting for a few more to jump in. All right. So up to this point, we've at least been introduced to loading stuff into our data frames and how we can manipulate data frames. And so this week, I don't think I'll go beyond R this week. So I think this will be the last week that I kind of discuss the properties of R. And I think this is the important stuff that we can use down the road for the semester. And so that's introducing us into ggplot. And ggplot is a package that makes presenting graphs fast, easy, and they are very aesthetic. We just see more and more, right? Even through the literature, you can just see an increase of ggplots in published papers, right? It's becoming very, very common. It's almost kind of the go-to. Anyway, so we'll play around with some ggplot stuff. And I know we've been, data frames, right? We can load in a data frame, we can make a data frame, but there are at least two data frames that are public, or they're built into R. And so one of those data frames is called iris, I-R-I-S. And so what iris is, I'm just going to do a head iris because this is just going to present a small fraction of the data frame instead of the whole data frame. So head iris, it's just going to tell me what's part of that data frame. And so this is a built-in data frame. It's just inherently part of R. And this is an old data set of measurements from flowers, specifically 3 species of iris flowers. So I can save this as a data frame and look at it up here, and I might as well. So let me just do, I'm going to do dat equals iris, just so it loads and I can look at it in this top left window pane, because it's a little bit easier to look at it. So in this data frame, we're going to see measurements for a sepal length, a sepal width, a petal length, and a petal width. And also the species of iris that are present. So we're going to see 3 species of iris. Setosa, versicolor, and virginica. Right, so these are our 3 species. And this is our data frame that we're just going to mess with for a little bit. Partially because almost any website that's going to discuss ggplots is going to start with iris, especially anything related to biology, right? Because this is a biological data set. And so with ggplots, I'm going to make a new script. I'm going to set my session. I'm going to set my working directory and start a script for a second. So let me go ahead and do that real quick. And I'm gonna start a new script. So let me just do just going to call it ggplot test. All right. And so ggplot is not built into R, and so I asked y'all to install that package. Install that package as ggplot2, so these modules will be loaded. And so if I just start typing ggplot, it's going to bring up the library name. And so these modules aren't necessarily loaded. And so if I want to load all these modules, all these functions linked to ggplot, I need to run my library command first. So I need to run my library ggplot2. So that's just, and it's going to go ahead and load in all those packages, all those modules, functions, etc. now that I have access to them. And so anytime that I make a ggplot script, I have to do the same thing in my script. So my first command is almost going to always be library and the plot I care about. Or the library I care about. So let's just, I'm going to comment this out, just so we all get in the habit of it. And so as I said, Iris is already built in, so I don't really have to do anything more than that. However, whenever I run ggplot, how this function almost, so this package almost has its own language, independent of R itself. And we'll see that in a second. It's going to look like its own language. And in many ways, it acts like it. And so ggplot, how we do this is first we have to call the function ggplot. So the library is ggplot2, but the function is ggplot. And that's going to stay in bracket, or stay in parentheses. Yeah. And so then I'm going to call my data frame, whatever it's called. I'm going to call my data frame. And then I have to use this AES function to set my axes, where x is equal to x and y is equal to y. We're going to do more with this AES function, but that's kind of the default, is to set an x and y axis, and this is like the default line of any ggplot, right? So this is how we start any plot, and it always has to be a data frame. So ggplot can't work on data frames. But let's at least look at kind of the default plotting function of R and see how terrible this is before we start playing around with ggplot to recognize how much better this is. So I can just plot. I'm just going to build a quick plot of Iris, or so I'll do sepal length and sepal width. Right, so that's our ugly default plot. Not very pretty looking, not very descriptive, but that's our starting point. Okay. And so whenever we're running our ggplot, we define it as we have to set a data frame, we have to set an x and a y axis, and then we actually had to set the kind of plot. And we do that by using a plus sign. It's basically like, here's our ggplot, now add these additional things. And so after that, it's your plotting functions. And this is where it starts to look like its own language, because we're going to see several different types of plotting functions, both here and in public tutorials. And so the easiest one, I think, is geom.point. Almost all of them start with geom something. So it's like ggplot, then the data frame, set axes, and determine plot type. Right, so this is the simplest plot that we can make with ggplot. It's going to look not as good as the first one. So we'll do this line for real. ggplot Iris AES x is equal to sepal dot length, y is equal to sepal dot width. And again, these are just column names of the Iris data frame. So we're just calling these column names. We're setting this is our x-axis, and that's going to be our y-axis. And so recognize whenever we call this ggplot, we don't have to use these parentheses this dollar sign, and to specifically call the columns as we do with plot. With ggplot, we're reading in that data frame, and then we're picking column names to be our x and y axes. Again, we'll set this to equal to geom_point plus geom_point. And leave that alone and just hit, well, I'm going to run that in the terminal. And yeah, right, so now we get this x and y plot. So it doesn't look much better than the default plot function, but we can make this look better, much easier. Okay. Now, whenever this whole line itself, this whole ggplot line will get massively long and hard to read. So it will extend. If we make this as long as we can, it will extend past the window. So it's not exactly easy to see. But R doesn't really care too much about white space. So whenever I make my ggplots, I separate. Anytime I see a plus line, I'm going to make a new line after that plus sign, and R won't complain. So I'm going to set this plot across several lines, and R is going to read this all as one line. As long as I have plus next line, R will keep reading this as a single line of code. And honestly, ggplot lines can get massively long. I'm not gonna lie. I've definitely made a few that are, 10 to 15 lines long, sometimes more. All right. Now here's the brilliance of ggplot, is that I can color in these points based off of the species. So I can set a parameter within my AES function to color these points so that all points belonging to Setosa are one color, all points to Versicolor are one color, etc. And I can do that with this function, with this other line or option called fill, and fill will equal to species. And so whenever I run this line, now we'll start to see colors appear for each species. Oh, that didn't work. I did species. I did fill. I want to do color. Color equals. Try that again. Color equals. There we go. So now my points have been colored, and I have this legend that tells me what point is from what color. Right, already we've made a much better looking graph than what's available with the default settings. But we can do more. We can certainly do more. So this geom function, geom something. So we're going to see there are a lot of different availabilities. There's more than this built in. So we can see geom line, we can see geom histogram, geom boxplot, etc. So there are a lot of, these are just 3 examples of the types of graphs that we can make. But no matter what graph I do make, it'll all start with ggplot, your data frame, x and y's, and how you want your points colored. Furthermore, the default is this gray background. But I don't necessarily like this gray background, and pretty much the scientific community or anybody drawing graphs doesn't like the gray background either. Almost everybody gets rid of it, and so we can get rid of it by calling another function That's the theme underscore BW. And so what that's saying is that instead of having a gray background, let's make this a black and white background. Right, so now that gray is gone, my grid is still present. That doesn't bother me so much. My grid is still present, but it's a little bit easier to see with that gray background gone. And again, we can do that with theme BW, and that's going to give us a black box around this, around our plotting space. Furthermore, I don't necessarily like having sepal.length and sepal.width. So I can control that as well. I can control what's going to be displayed as my X and Y labels. So I can do xlab, and then within that I'm going to put something in quotes. So it's just because I don't like that sepal dot. So I can do sepal length with a space instead. Same thing for my Y, ylab. Sepal.width or sepal width. Okay, and so now my sepal widths are gone, or sorry, my periods are gone, and I've set this. How do we extend the command to multiple lines? So what I'm doing, whenever I'm doing this, so what I'm doing is I'm holding my shift and typing down my down button to highlight all these lines at once. And as I said, so as long as I have a plus sign at the end of each line, R will keep reading this as a single line. So whenever I do my control enter, I'm sending all of that to the command line, so it will just run, so I don't have to run this script. I can just run this one line from the script. Yeah, so that's just adding this plus sign at the end of each line. No, dude, ask as many questions as you need to. Don't apologize for asking questions, right? You don't know what we're doing. Questions save time. All right. And so if we look at this data frame, so this is certainly one we can do, and I can save this entire plot. So I can save this entire plot as a variable. So for example, I may do scat plot and save this entire thing to this variable scat plot, right? It's just a scatter plot, right? If I want to make multiple plots in a graph or in a script, I can save that plot. So for example, so I don't have to keep typing this whole thing out. And so recognize whenever I set that as to a variable and run it, I don't get a plot. If I want to pull that plot up, then I would have to call the scat plot, and it'll bring it back up. Another little nifty function about RStudio is that I can scroll through all the plots that I've saved or that I've made with this arrow left and right. So all of them, they're going to look the same for a while, so that's not very helpful. But I can at least look at all of my variations, right? So now there's my very first plot. All right, there's my very first plot. So I can scroll through all these plots using the these arrows to go forwards and backwards. Okay, that's fine. All right. But let's say I don't necessarily like having an X and Y plot. So I may want to display my data as a box and whisker graph. So I'm going to redo this as a box and whisker plot. But as a box and whisker, I can only have one axis. I won't be defining two axes. I'm just going to define one axis. So it's still going to be the same thing. ggplot, iris, AES. I think I'm going to do, no, I do have to set my X. I'm going to set my X equal to species. and my y equal to, let's do sepal length. And now I'm going to do fill equals species plus geom box. Put that on a new line. Oh, plus theme BW. I'm not going to worry about my x and y's just yet. We'll see what happens. Load that in. And now I have a box plot of sepal length for all three species, right? So my x-axis is going to define, or I set my x-axis is equal to the species name, and my y-axis equal to the sepal length. And so if there's one thing that I think is valuable, regardless of what discipline it is to get good at the ggplotting, because this is even just the simple stuff. I won't. We can make ggplot do so much more. Multi-pane graphs, graphs within a graph, etc. We can all do it with these tools at hand. And if there's a property about data frames that we should keep in mind when we're looking at iris, it's definitely debatable whether this is the best kind of data frame, because ggplot really likes, and we'll see examples of this, ggplot really likes one line, one row to consist of one point. But that doesn't mean this is bad, because we can have our x and y's and do more plots with this, right? We can choose from any of these 4 or 5 columns to make our plots, right? So we can make a box plot of each of these, because we at least have a species assigned to this individual, and so at least all of these points came from one individual. So we have the petal length, width, sepal, blah, for one individual, and ultimately this data frame I think is about 150 lines long. Yeah, 150 lines long. All right, so this is really old data. I'm not gonna lie, this is really old. I think this is from like Ronald Fisher's like 1930s kind of data, right? So an old OG statistician playing around with very simple data. But nonetheless, we can certainly plot it and play with it ourselves. So I'm going to save this. I'm just going to save this as box. Let's see. And so I don't necessarily like that I have a species X or a species identifier here. I don't necessarily like that. And I certainly don't really like having a legend over here, because it's already defined. Like my legend colors are the same as my X and Y, so I don't necessarily need my legend here. And I could get rid of that. But I think the fundamentals are a little more important than that just yet. Let's see. 25 minutes. Let's see what else we can make. So if we remember our old histograms, so hist, let's just say iris. Let's do sepal width. Right, kind of a plain, boring histogram. Not super fun to look at, and everything is lumped together. So it's just this entire column of from all three species that we really can't pull out. But we can make ggplot do that for us. So let's make another one. Where we set x equal to sepal width. Is that what I did? Yeah, sepal width. Let's try fill equals to species, and then do a geom histogram. So a nice thing about our studio is at least letting us fill this in, so we can type in geom, and so we can see all the different kind of geoms that we can plot. So an abline, box plot, density. I like density graphs. I like density plots a lot. Error bars, pretty handy. Histogram, right? This is massive. This is a massive library of plotting functions. Anyways, histogram. Let's see how that works. Is this complaining at me? Yes, that will complain at me because I'm missing a parentheses. Okay. Oh, that's ugly, but it'll do. That's pretty hideous, but we can make that look better. And so we can edit these additional options. So I can edit what's inside of this box plot or geom histogram or what, any of them. I can modify them. So I can change my bin width and ask for it to be bordered as well. So I can change my bin width equal, let me set that to 0.2. Color is going to define the box color, not necessarily what it's filled in. I've already defined that using fill. But I'm going to set that to black. And let's see what happens. Yeah, so that looks a little better. That looks a little nicer. Kind of tells us where all these different points are from. But let's see if I can get that a little bit nicer with a density plot. Density. Let's see what happens. And so I'm not gonna lie. As I said, this feels like its own language a lot of the time. And so you almost have to go looking around. I don't just know these commands, right? Sometimes I will spend half an hour to an hour trying to find the right commands to make my graph look as good as it can, or how I want it to be. I should say how I want it to be. And so geom density, I have to set a couple of other variables like stat is equal to density. How do I know that? Because I'm looking at a command tutorial that tells me I need this. And let's just see what I'm looking at right now. Okay, right, so now it's giving me these histograms, but it's a density of points for each species. And recognize like it's not opaque. It's very solid, so I can't see behind. But I can change the opaqueness with an alpha within this geom density. I'm setting parameters of the geom density function. Let's see if this works. Set this to 0.2. And that did not work at all. 0.2. right? So that controls how opaque or how well I can see through these plots. So now I can kind of, it can look at this better, right? Visualize my data a little bit better. Pretty nifty things. And so just with a handful of commands, starting with the same fundamental line, effectively the same fundamental line, we can make a whole bunch of different kinds of plots. We can change colors, right? So there is like a default palette of ggplot, but I really don't like that default palette. However, we should not be touching that because that's already kind of its own monster of ggplotting. So we won't worry about colors just yet. But yeah, I mean, with ggplot, it's easier to look at our data and to try to find patterns in our data than it is, I think, in a lot of different ways, right? Because we can look at our data and say that this is what's happening in our data. This is what we should be focusing on. These are the kind of relationships we should be focusing on. Okay, and the last thing I can mention is saving these plots. So this is density. So let's, as I've kind of pointed out before, we can go to export, save as image or save as a PDF, and that's fine. But sometimes all I want to do is just rerun a script and have my image saved in a very specific way. So if I want to save these images, first of all, I have to define them, right? So I have to at least save the plot itself, you know, scat plot, box plot, whatever. I have to at least save that plot as a variable, and then I can use ggsave to say I want this saved as box test.png. Whatever. So ggsave will read your extension and make the appropriate file. I believe it can do that by itself. And then I'm going to define the plot that I want to save. So this is box. And I can additionally do more than that, right? So, but this is like the default save. So if I just run this command in my terminal, it's going to complain. Grid draw, no ethical method for grid draw applied. What the hell does that mean? Whoops. No, box is there, box is fine. But I'm doing something stupid. I know I'm doing something stupid. Nope, I know I'm doing stupid. I think I had these things reversed. I need to call the function first and then how I want it saved. Let's see if that... Oh, I'm about to get cranky. I'm about to get cranky. But I think it's saved. I honestly think it's saved. No, it has not saved correctly. I've done something stupid. Yeah, so file name, yes, the file name's in the plot. So I had to write the first time. File name's in the plot. There we go. Now it's saved. I just had to define, I had to specifically define how I want it saved. So I just want to save it as a PNG. I think that worked. And so you can save it as a PDF or pretty much anything that you want with these commands. And so that should have saved. Yes, that saved. Right. So now I just have that image, a part of my directory. All right. So this is what I've basically done. Is show you the 3 ways that I know how to use R well. And that's load in my data, make a graph, and then save that graph in the same directory as my data. So I basically have this constant stream of input or data function output, right? Data function output, where my script is the function that I want to play with. All right. Any questions about this? Otherwise, I think I'm going to call it there. If there's anything I need to repeat or anything off or something I didn't explain, let me know. Now is that time. I'll do some more ggplotting stuff on Wednesday, and also how to get not a very great file from R, or not a great data frame for ggplotting and turn it into a good data frame for plotting, and a couple other graphs that we can make. But yeah, that's going to be it for me today, and we'll see y'all again on Wednesday.